Welcome to Imposter Hour with Liz and Greg. We're all about geeking out on the things that fuel authors and artists. We want to dive into imposter syndrome, that nagging doubt that even the most talented creatives feel, and explore how it pops up in their lives. We'll also be speaking with people who feature imposter characters in their work, or who may have dealt with imposter situations in their lives. We're excited to talk about creativity and self-doubt with writers and artists across different mediums whose work we admire.
And tonight, or today, depending on when you're listening to this and where you are, we are so excited to have our friend and author Scott Leeds on the show. Scott is a writer from the Pacific Northwest. His first novel, Schrader's Chord, was released last September from Tor Nightfire, and his next novel, title yet to be revealed, will not be released last September. And that's about all I can say about that. But I do want to also add to that bio that Scott composed our amazing Imposter Hour music. And I feel like you did it in like record time because I sent you an email saying we want something like jaunty sinister.
Yeah.
And then you sent something right back.
I normally, when like I'm making music for clients, I don't move as fast because, you know, you want them to think that you tried. But you know, you guys are friends, so it's like, it's fine. Nice. If you guys need notes, I'll just do it now. I normally try to like get it right up into the point where there's like, you know, the deadline, so they can only have like 4 hours to give me notes.
Right.
But
right.
You know, whatever.
But now you're doing it on the podcast.
Yeah. Exactly.
I like this.
I mean, the only note I have is you're a fucking genius.
No.
Yeah.
Don't feed What's this show called?
Exactly.
Good point.
We're undoing our own theme, and we're only getting started.
Damn
it.
So you gave us a very brief bio, but you know, we happen to know for a fact that you do many things, and I perceive that you do many things really, really well. You know, music, writing, talking about Twin Peaks at great length, reading. But you know, here you are on our show, and I feel like we felt like you would have something to contribute. So can you talk a little bit about how imposter syndrome shows up in your life?
I mean, I don't know if I never, or if I ever don't experience imposter syndrome. It's that might tie in really well with, like, you know, you guys asking me to write a bio and me just going, oh, it's not important. None of it's important. It doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't. Can I swear?
Sure.
Yeah.
It doesn't fucking matter. Like, imposter syndrome is an interesting thing, because I think from the like little bit that I've thought about it, which is a lot, I think that there are only a couple like realms in which it really tends to take hold. And I think that's creativity, or the arts, and politics. I think, you know, if you're a really good lawyer or a doctor or a plumber or an electrician, I can't imagine that you would have imposter syndrome. I think because you trained specifically for that thing, you went to school or a trade school, you have a degree stating that you learned all the necessary attributes to complete this job, and then you do that job. When you walk in and you fix a sink, people don't go like, oh my God, you're a genius. It's like, well, no, not really. There's a way to do this. I mean, there are ways, like, you can employ creativity in doing kind of tradesman's type things, but I'm very, very envious of people who are not in politics or in the arts, because the confidence they must have, knowing that there are a finite amount of ways to do this certain thing. They employ one of those finite things, and the thing is done. And I think, you know, on the opposite side of that, unfairly, it's the creatives or the people in the arts that I think get the most compliments, because it is sort of a, you know, it's a 1 out of a million kind of job. It's a 1 out of a million gig. And when you start to, sort of show those attributes, I'm saying attributes a lot. Must be my word of the day. That's the magic word. When you start to show those things when you're young, people tend to be kind of impressed with them, whether you're a musician or, you know, you have a sort of preternatural ability for art or drawing or storytelling or acting or whatever. You know, at a parent's party or a friend party of a friends of parents, they always make you like sit down on the piano, play a song, sit, you know, go do a little thing up there, you know, a magic trick, stand up there and like, and all the parents out there sitting with their scotches have to turn and look at you do the thing. And, you know, if you're really good at math, or you're, you know, you have an aptitude for science, or you just have really good grades, no one sits there and goes, go stand up and show everybody your report card. You know, like stand up and show everybody how you know, like you can recite the Pythagorean theorem. People don't really do that, and that's unfair. One of my best friends that I grew up with right now is a literal rocket scientist, an aeronautical engineer, and I remember being kids together, and he never really got the compliments that he should have gotten because the kid's a genius. Now he's, you know, he's not a kid anymore, and he's a bigger genius. And so I think, you know, those of us that are, I mean, politics I can almost understand because nobody can really prepare for politics. There's really no politics school. So you kind of get into it and either you're good at it or bad at it. But either way, it seems in these days, not to get too political, but it doesn't really matter because you can just sit there and do it, and you can be on TV and you can do this thing. People, you know, you can kind of get that fame. But, you know, with the arts, like, yeah, you can go to school. Yeah, you can do these things and we can get into this. But I'm sort of the school that, like, I don't know if it can be taught from zero. I think that you have to have at least a little bit of talent, even a modicum of talent in a certain area in the arts. And then what school does is it just sort of fosters that. It just kind of curates your talent. And, you know, it may unlock doors that you didn't know were closed. And you know, you can kind of teach people, you know, kind of what you do and your methods, but there has to be something there to begin with. And with most other jobs, I think you can, for the most part, you know, learn it from zero. And I think that's why we have imposter syndrome, is because if it's something that you were sort of born with, you never earned it. And it just kind of came stuck on the car. And when people just go, oh my God, this is so amazing, you don't feel like you've done the work necessarily to accomplish it in your adult life. And so it seems very strange to be complimented on something that you do naturally. That's like saying someone be like, man, you're really good at smiling. Like, wow. Like breathing, I've never seen anybody breathe like you. You are an expert breather. It's very strange that you would feel very self-conscious being like, well, you know, do I breathe that much better than anybody else? And I remember being a kid, and when I could write or I could draw or I could make music or something, it made no sense that nobody else could. And I think part of that is maybe, you know, there is a talent aspect to that, but I think also it's just interest as well. Because I know from the friends I've made and lost over the years by just boring them to tears with ridiculous trivia and going super, super, super deep on things that, like on Ray Bradbury books that nobody cares about. It's like, oh, this is just stuff that I really like and I'm really passionate about. It makes sense that I would want to do this, which leads me to another thing, which is I don't understand how people can read a book and then have that book not make them want to write a book. Same thing with listening to music. How do you listen to music and not want to make music? I don't understand that. And I don't know how you can sit there and just sort of passively enjoy something and just go, you know, I shut that book and be like, well, that's nice. Now I can just go about my day and do my thing and not care about not necessarily wanting to better what you read, but just want to participate in it. But yeah, so I've been talking a long time. What do you guys think?
Well, you're our guest, and you know we like to set the table for you. No, that's really interesting. There's a thing that occurred to me as you were saying, as you were kind of talking about that, right? About how you're kind of born with it and you grow up with it and you take it for granted. And the other thing that occurs to me, which is kind of a corollary, I think, is that a huge part of being an artist of any stripe is observation, right? Observational skills. And I feel like the more we talk to other creatives, other writers, other artists, you know, part of that is it is like you said, it's things that you take for granted. Being someone who has that almost ingrained observational quality, skill set, whatever you want to call it. And I think it is one of those things where you take it for granted and you don't realize that it's almost like part of your personality type that has been ingrained in you, that you've grown up with because of, whatever situation or circumstance you grew up in. It is one of those things that you take for granted. So it may be that it's also not as finely tuned in other people who end up going into more conventional kind of pathways in terms of work and career. Right.
Sure.
So there is that part of it where we're all kind of operating with this very similar skill set that's not something that's taught in school, cultivated. It's almost innate because you grew up with it in some cases as like a survival skill, as a way to make sense of maybe the mayhem around you or whatever. But that's something that I have realized a lot in speaking with creatives and authors and things.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember there's a very clear memory in my head when I went to Catholic school growing up, and I would be an altar boy, not for any sort of inherent religious reasons, but because it got you out of class.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would go and do that, and we would do it for the regular mass that we would have weekly on Wednesdays, but we would do weddings and funerals and stuff like that. I remember we did a funeral, my friend Dan and I, and there was a guy that came up to give the eulogy, and he sort of looked like Red Foreman from that 70s show, but he had like really big, like bug eye, like George A. Romero glasses.
Nice.
And all while giving the eulogy, which was like 10 minutes, he took off his glasses and put them back on like 50 times. Never once used his glasses to read anything. He just kept doing it. And it drove me insane. Not like it didn't bug me. I just had to know why he was doing it. And I remember after the funeral was done, I was walking with Dan back to class, and there was a teacher behind us. I didn't know this at the time, but I was asking him, like, did you notice that guy take off his fucking glasses 50 times and put them back on? And Dan was like, no. And I was like, well, didn't you watch the eulogy? He's like, yeah. And I was like, you didn't notice that? And he's like, I mean, I guess, but I don't like, doesn't really matter. And I was like, how can it not matter? And I remember the teacher pulling me aside and saying, that's what like a writer does. Like you just figured out a character. And this was in like 6th grade. Mm-hmm. And at that point I liked writing. I never actually thought I could be a writer because I thought like the government had to allow you to do it. But that was the first time someone had ever said, like, compared what I thought or compared like my modes of thinking to something that I, didn't know I wanted to aspire to be. And I was like, oh, okay. And I think that's another reason why, there are so many introverts in the arts as well, because we are the creeps. We kind of sit on the sidelines and we look and we watch with great interest. And if we're pulled into it, our social battery is so small that, we're like, and it's sleep time.
Right.
And, but yeah, I like observation is very, very, I don't know, it's fun. Like people watching is fun. And I imagine you guys feel the same way, but for me, when I'm writing, plot is great. It gets you where you need to go, but creating characters is so much fun. Mm-hmm. It's just you're God. You can just create these people out of thin air, and not totally out of thin air. I mean, obviously, all attributes we pull from something that we know, whether we do it consciously or not. Right. But that is just, and a lot of that stuff you end up cutting anyway because it takes away from the story or it slows things down. But while doing it, it's really fun.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I particularly love about your writing. And in Schrader's Chord, the characters are just so they're complex. I'm laughing at Greg slowly orbiting your copy.
You got to keep it sexy.
Yeah, the observations that you have, kind of throughout your storytelling and your characters and everything I've read of yours, it's not derivative, and it doesn't remind me of other things I've seen or heard. It feels very clearly things that you've observed and then threaded into your writing, even unconsciously.
Well, thank you.
And just even earlier when you were, telling the story about the kid having to show his report card, you gave the detail about the parents holding scotches. Like, people who are not living in a world of constant observational like absorption, don't add details like that. And those are the details that make the difference between someone telling you a story that you kind of let pass you by and one that you really like absorb. And, you know, one of the things that I love about you as a writer and as a person is I think that you're deeply sensitive, highly sensitive to the smaller things happening around us. And I guess the question that brings up for me is, how does that kind of integrate in your world and life outside of being a writer, you know, good and bad? Like, just to, you know, give an example in my own life, when I'm having just a normal everyday experience, I'm writing like 15 stories in my mind, which actually makes it very hard for me to focus on what's happening. You know, if someone's talking to me, I really have to concentrate because my background processor is like writing 3 different versions of that person's like murder or romance or, you know, share at a 12-step meeting, you know, given the day. But so I know being, having an overactive imagination, which I think is a superpower now, can really have some hard costs in areas of our lives that are not creative. So how does that experience manifest for you?
I mean, look how gray my hair is. It's just stress all the time. I completely agree with all of that. I think that I remember I was misdiagnosed at a young age of having ADD, because it turns out that I can focus really well. It's just I don't focus on what I'm supposed to be focusing on. And it is laser focus, and it's hard to get it to, you know, it's a very one track. It's very like zeroed in, but it's at the wrong thing. And usually it's what I'm focusing on is what you just talked about, which is if someone, like when I was in class in high school and someone came in and, you know, gave the teacher a note, like a student, and then left again. I assume most people go, I wonder what was in that note. Whatever. And then they get back to going in. I'm gone at that point. I have this whole narrative about what's in the note. It's probably personal. It's probably about the teacher's, you know, husband or wife. What happened to the husband or wife? They lost all their shares of stock in this certain company, and now they have to sell the house. But they have to move to like Bismarck, and because now like they were on the table about whether they wanted to go and take care of their grandparents, but you know, now losing the stock, that kind of made the decision for them. And then by the time I know, it's like ring, the class is over, and I go, fuck, I didn't hear anything for the rest of the class. Yes. And I think you know, that that coupled with having a good memory makes a writer. Like this curiosity about the human condition, about stories, just, you know, capital S stories, and then having a good memory, because we're able to, and I think every writer has a good memory. I think some have better than, I mean, like not all of us are. Who's the lady from Taxi that had the like photographic memory, or still does, I guess? Mary Lou Henner.
Oh, Mary Lou Henner. Yeah.
Yeah. That would be painful. Just to have, you know, everything cataloged, like even what you ate for breakfast on June 4th, 1978, like that would be terrible. Right. But I think writers in general tend to have a pretty good memory because we have these hard drives of all these little things. I think we fling away the things that don't matter. But then also at the same time, we're scared of the things that don't matter, because what if they do matter? So we tend to kind of scrapbook everything. Our brains are George Costanza's wallet. It's just it's just packed in with all these things, and most of it we'll probably never use because we won't be able to in our lifetimes write as many books to fill, you know, to empty the George Costanza wallet with everything that we have. But on those moments where we go, oh, and you reach back in the archive and you're going to pull that out, like I almost threw that away. Thank God I kept that. But that can be, it can be anxiety inducing. It can be stress inducing. And I often wonder, like, what do other people think about? Everybody seems like so healthy and just, they go about their day. If they get a little bit like chest pain, they just go, it's nothing. And I'm sitting there being like writing my will and going, you know, like my sister's like, well, you have back problems, so it's your back. I'm like, no, that's in my back. This is my chest. She's like, yeah, but all the muscles kind of pull and everything can kind of happen. And I'm like, no, I'm sure my triglycerides are really high. Sure, my bad cholesterol is really high. My good cholesterol is really low, and my arteries are just calcified. And here I go. I'm going to be the person that dies young. I'm going to be the person, like all my high school friends are going to be like, do you remember Scott? Oh yeah, he died. And that's my brain all the time.
Right.
It's always, if it's not worst case scenario, it's pretty bad case scenario.
Right. And you've already walked it through the 15 steps to where you've decided
Yeah.
how you're going to go, what's on the
Yeah.
tombstone.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that brings up another interesting corollary as well. We were talking earlier about the plumber who goes to work and doesn't have the imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
The plumber that goes to work without the imposter syndrome also, when he clocks out after the last job of the day at 6 p.m., goes home and does whatever he does.
Right.
Whereas writers, I feel like we're never really off the clock, truly,
No.
right?
We never get to retire.
Right. And I mean, that's retire for the day, retire for the weekend, retire for our careers. There's kind of no retirement, right? So that's another thing that threads through this whole thing is that, you're kind of thrust into this thing that you can also never flip the switch on, which creates another, and you're always thinking through all of these various permutations of these things that either have to do with your project or maybe not, your chest pain, your, fill in the blank. That's another, that's another little, bit of
creative people, and I struggle to use that word because it just sounds so, ugh. But like creative people, by and large, are surrounded by people their whole lives who look them dead in the eye and go, oh, I wish I was that creative. And you just want to say to them, no, you don't.
Yeah.
You don't want this.
Right.
I know it seems fun, but it's not. You do not want to play in the sandbox. Like you have a great life. You're making a great salary. Everything's good. You don't want this misery and pain and, this just unending self-reflection.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah.
It's a prison sentence.
Yeah.
Well, riffing more on like creativity is a mental illness, which I certainly subscribe to.
Yeah.
We're thriller and horror writers between the three of us with, other genres that we've delved into for sure. But, we all tend to catastrophize often in our writing. And also in what we consume, right? We all know we're horror movie fans. We've been to a lot of horror movies together, read scary shit, talked about scary shit. I love true crime. What do you think it is about yourself that you gravitated towards kind of like the darker genre?
That's kind of a hard question to answer because in this house, there's a box. And in that box is a head. No, in that box are like a bunch of old like scrapbooks and like portfolios and stuff from when I was in preschool and kindergarten. And it's just filled with vampires and wolfmen and mummies and gothic castles and big sharks. I was a big Jaws fan. Still am. Who wouldn't be?
Same.
And when I was a kid, I liked scary movies. I saw Hellraiser way too young, and I knew like, okay, I'm not there yet. I will be, I'm sure, someday. But when I was a kid, I really liked what could be considered like family friendly spooky. Like there was an old special, like Disney's Halloween Treat that had great stuff. There was a great TV special called The Halloween That Almost Wasn't, and later retitled as The Night That Dracula Saved the World, with Judd Hirsch as Dracula. It's fantastic. Witch's Night Out, great. Mr. Boogedy, great. So I loved that stuff. And I felt like a weird kind of strange comfort in it. And I remember seeing Edward Scissorhands when it came out in theaters. And I remember walking out of the theater and going like, I want to live in that castle on the hill. Mm-hmm. And my dad was like, why? Like, and I was like, I don't know. It just seems really cozy. And he's like, it's like filled with cobwebs and dust and like Vincent Price's dead corpse. Because Edward didn't move it out and bury it. And so there's no furniture and like it's just this cavernous place. And I just said, I don't know. I just want to live there. I would die before I had to live in one of the pastel colored sort of houses down on the lower level. And So there's always been sort of a strange comfort in it. And as I got older and I started to, go to the video store and pull things out like, like Basket Case and Chud and all those wonderful sort of video nasties from the 80s, Sleepaway Camp. I remember just everybody I remember my teachers were really concerned about me. They would always write home, or like during like teacher conferences, they'd be like, he just really likes the dark stuff. And, I thought I think they thought they had like a little Jeffrey Dahmer on their hands, just kind of percolating. But they were like, but, he's also really nice, and he's very friendly, and, he's not this sort of like Lord of Evil of Darkness that sits in the back of the class, like scowling. I was an introvert, to be sure, but I was never like a surly kid. I was a pretty happy kid. And I think part of it is, disaster preparedness in a certain way, going like, well, if I keep watching these things, if something goes wrong, and we saw that happen with COVID, those of us that work in thrillers and horror were like, we're fine. We got this licked. We've run this in our head so many times, and, we're okay. I remember, when everybody started wearing masks and they started putting up the lucite partitions, and I'm like, this is all I've ever wanted. This has been my dream. If someone sneezes, it's not going to hit me. This is fantastic. And they were telling everybody stay like, 6 feet apart. I was like, would this never end? Nobody shook hands anymore. I was like, this is the best case ever. And,
and you didn't have to leave your house.
I know. And like, I don't want to be glib about, obviously we lost a lot of people, and that's terrible. But I think that there's also the thing too of those of us that live with the stress and anxiety and the doomsday scenarios in our head. When you go in and watch something that's horrific on screen, or you read it in a book, you can walk away and say, at least I've got it better than them. And to say nothing of the fact that it's also it's a fun time. It's a fun genre. It's thrilling. It's a roller coaster for those that don't have the time to go to a theme park. You can sit down and do this thing. It's also sort of a bet from the filmmaker or the writer to you, the viewer or reader, saying like, I got something scary, and you go, okay, let's see. And either it works or it doesn't. But either way, I think this is a great thing about thriller and horror the fan base, is that they tend to be just grateful that you did anything at all. And, even if it didn't work for them, they might just be like, yeah, it's not my cup of tea, but I'll try the next one, because that's how I am. And I was like, oh, that's fandom. There are some books from writers that I love that just didn't hit the mark for me. But does that mean I'll never pick up another book? No, I will be there again when their next book comes out, and I'll crack it open, and you make that sort of covenant with that artist, going, let's do it again. And yeah, I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah,
I tend to kind of black out when I talk on these things. And so I'm always worried after I end. I'm like, I hope I didn't say anything stupid. Oh boy.
That's where all the good stuff comes out.
Yeah. I know.
Get into flow state.
Yeah.
No, it's interesting. One of the things I was thinking about when you were talking too is, and I think it happens on both sides of the aisle, as all three of us obviously are not only writers, but also really avid consumers of the things that we write, and, genres that are kind of around that same area. But there's a certain, if you would agree with this, Scott, I don't know, a cathartic aspect as well, not only of reading the stuff and having that thing of, what you were just saying of, I've seen where this could go. I've dealt with it. I've seen all the permutations, and I kind of walked out the other end. But when you were talking earlier about being a kid and being in school, and the teacher saying, oh, he's kind of, he tends to go sort of dark, but he's a really nice kid, right? I feel like there's also that advantage of being a writer, because we're able to actually take a lot of that stuff, a lot of the uncertainty and a lot of the trauma and everyday horrors, and we're able to process that through our filter and spit it out the other side, hopefully with either some, if not hard answers, at least helpful questions. I don't know if that resonates with you.
No, absolutely it does. I think those questions that, we ask ourselves have informed what we're doing now. Like, we have this stockpile. And also I think there may be something sort of like, I guess, kind of Lynchian in the way those of us when we were young that like this stuff, it's sort of Lynchian in how we operated, which is, if things are going too well if everything is this sort of Norman Rockwell, like, pastoral American experience with, mom, like, dinner's ready, honey, and like I'm home, and like everything is just this white picket fences and blue skies, you're like, something's got to be happening. Something's got to be wrong here.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
There's got to be something under the surface that's not right, because this is too perfect. Everything is going too well.
Yeah.
And I think that's why obviously we gravitate toward Lynch, because he explores that, and I think he recognized that before any of us did.
Mm-hmm.
But also why we liked horror too, because it doesn't pretend to be everything is toothpaste model smiley like all the time, where it's like you get that. Remember, I forget who, maybe it was an episode of The Simpsons, but it was just like, I love those Stephen King books for the first 30 pages, when everybody's happy and loves each other. And then, like I would love to live in Castle Rock in the first 30 pages before shit goes really wrong. But yeah, I think, and again, I don't want to sound or make it sound like writers are jaded or cynical, because I don't think we are. I think that cynicism is death for a writer or any artist, really.
Mm-hmm.
You may be able to get one or two stories or one or two books out of it, or a painting or something, maybe a movie, but in perpetuity, I don't think so. I think you have to sort of remain open and non-cynical, even though I think we're skeptical. We always go like, well, what's really going on there? What's really happening? What's really beneath the surface? But I don't think we discount the good completely, because I think we've all also seen evidence of that too. That, I think that's the Ray Bradbury side of us that goes, no, like there can be good there. Like, and then again, it's like, if you don't have the good, what fights against the bad?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that segues actually really well into kind of one of the other aspects of why we started this show, which is being drawn to writing characters who are kind of multi-layered, complex, duplicitous, etc. Are one way on the surface, and then there's a lot more behind. Can you talk a little bit about when you're drawing your characters, or your characters are leading you, however your process goes?
Yeah. How
that unfolds, because your characters are not just one thing, for sure.
Well, thank you. I hope they're not. In Schrader's Chord, like I have this regret. Like, I think I made some of my characters like too pure. And I know that's not true, because it's for Schrader's Chord, first book that I've published, not the first book that I've written. And in the books that I've written previously, I think I was not necessarily more aggressive with my characters, but I think I might have been a little bit more lenient on these ones than I would have preferred. But then at the same time, you have to go, well, what does the story itself need? And I think that story needed those character archetypes. But anyway, getting to your question, I think that, and I don't think I'm saying anything anybody would disagree with, as certainly any writer would disagree with, but, black and white characters are very boring. Mm-hmm. And there is no such thing. I don't know anybody that is purely good or purely bad. I'm sure if I met, like Josef Mengele, I'd be like, well, no, that guy's purely bad. I know they have existed, but in this sort of modern day and age, anything other than sort of a gray area character is kind of boring. And I right now I'm thinking of two characters, both in TV shows, not books, but Sawyer from Lost and Jaime Lannister from Game of Thrones. Well, I guess he was in books, of course. How they started as the reviled, hated characters, and by not even the end, but by the middle of the series, became fan favorites. Mm-hmm. And because it showed, like, I'm thinking of that moment. I can't remember. I read the Thrones books a long time ago, so I don't remember if this exact scene was in the books. I'm sure it was. But when he's sitting in that giant, basically hot tub with Brienne of Tarth, and he tells the story of what happened with the Mad King, And, you know, she's been calling him Kingslayer this whole time, an Oathbreaker, and she's just been shitting all over the guy. And rightly so, because he's not been the coolest of dudes up until that point. But when he kind of gets into it and he really tells the story from his perspective, you know, you open up to him and let him in a way that you haven't until now, even though we know that he's an incestuous murderer that pushed a child out of a window, that he's just done the most horrible, abhorrent things. But in that moment you go, yeah, I can see it from that perspective, you know, and then that's when that empathy starts to kick in, and you start to go, well, what happened to this guy early on in life? Obviously he had a terrible, you know, like commandeering father, and, you know, a lot was expected of him, and, you know, he took this oath to be, you know, in the Kingsguard, which is akin to priesthood, where you have to be celibate. And it's just this, like, why would you constrict yourself that way when he's this excellent fighter, a very good looking person? And then when you start to, like, unpeel those layers, it gets more and more interesting. And I'm reminded of another thing too. My buddy, who is now the aeronautical engineer, I remember once, he's a big Star Trek fan, as am I, especially the original series. But he goes, you know, my one problem is with Spock. And I said, what's that? And he goes, well, he's half human. I wish Gene Roddenberry would have just made him entirely Vulcan. I think that would have been a more interesting character. And I couldn't have disagreed with him more. And I said, look, again, sort of like with the cynicism, that would have given you maybe 5 or 6 really good episodes. But after a while, to see someone, you know, who has no kind of you know, humanity in him, and it's all just driven on logic, it's gonna get boring. I know the writers would get bored. Yeah. There's nothing to connect to. And I think, again, man, I walked all the way around the park on this one, but to get back to what your question was, I think it's how can I connect to this person, even if they're terrible, even if they're, you know, purebred. How can I connect to this person? Because if I can connect to this person, the hope is that a reader can. And you know, in doing so, like, I think it's never one big thing that makes a character a character. It's the minutia. It's all the tiny little things that a reader can look and recognize and go, I thought that, I've done that thing. That's exactly, you know, God, that character's so unlikable, but you know what? I've had that thought about, you know, the McFlurry. So I get where this person's coming from, even just in this moment. And that one tiny little moment is all you need to connect with a reader. And then you've got them, and they've got you.
This will henceforth be known as the McFlurry episode. We have a title.
Let's also not discount the McRib or the McDLT.
Well, I think McDonald's itself has finally discounted the McRib. I heard that they retired that thing.
Really? No, it's like Daniel Day-Lewis. It'll come back.
Yeah, it'll come back. You're right. They're teasing us now.
They're going to get bored.
It's like supply and demand, right? They're going to pull some scarcity, and then, oh, well, bam, it's back on the market.
Exactly. Yeah. All right, Mr. McRib, you can sit there in Ireland and make shoes all you want, but you're going to be in another movie.
Yeah. Look how quickly that went from the McFlurry episode to the McRib episode.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I mean, and that is the iconic status of the McRib coming through.
It's the McEpisode.
It's a McEpisode. That's exactly what it done. Good. Well, this is good. We've now gone completely off the rails, but in the most delightful fashion.
I think we're all hungry.
That's what it is. Maybe it's late.
I actually have a question for you guys, because I'm a huge fan. I mean, yes, we're friends, but I'm also a huge fan of your work, and very excited for the next book.
Thank you.
I am in awe of your ability to balance plot with character. That to me, like, you guys, every time I read one of your books, it is like you have, like, engineered a page turner in a way that, like, I cannot put those books down. And the best compliment I can give is 30 pages in, probably less, I completely forget that it's you guys. And when I finish it, I'm like, man, I know them. Like, it takes a second for me to remember. But my question to you is this, and I ask because I've gotten this question a couple times, which is, and usually not from interviews, it's from, like, friends. And it's this, where it's like, you guys write, like just taut, amazing thrillers. How often do you read thrillers? And how often do you guys veer away from that into different genres? What's sort of what's the balance for you guys there?
Yeah. Greg, do you want to take that first?
Sure. I mean, I would say I read a fair amount of thrillers, partly because that is our genre. So you want to be current. Also, we've gotten to the point now where we've gotten to be friends with a lot of other thriller writers and gotten to not only be friends, but also, with it's kind of sort of what you were just saying about you'll read a great book and then realize after you've read it and lost yourself completely that you know the person. So there's that wild thing, which also, to bring it back around, I think probably adds, but maybe in a really good way, to the imposter syndrome that I know I feel, which is I have this person that I know, and we're at Thriller Fest together, and we're hanging out, having a drink at the bar, and then I'm also in awe of that person's work. Right?
Yeah.
So it's like, oh, you're an incredible person, and I love hanging out with you, and also I really am like looking at your work as inspiration for things that I would love to be able to do in a thriller, right? So there's that kind of thing where that was. So as a result of that, I mean, I'm reading a lot of thrillers, but I like to read fairly broadly. And part of that is just because I have broader tastes. I think also as a writer, it's helpful, I think, to read different genres, because you're going to build your skill set from things that genres do particularly well. Historical fiction, you'll figure out how to research. I've been reading a lot of poetry before bed, partly because it helps to calm that forever churning brain a little bit. Because there's something about being able to fall into that meter, that kind of that rhythmic writing and that flow that helps to calm your brain. But it also, I think, as a writer, it helps with your mechanics. You can when you come back to the page and you're trying to write something, you can use a lot of those poetic techniques in order to streamline your writing or to achieve desired effects. If you're going for more of a staccato, terse thing versus a flow, I mean, that's great. Obviously the thriller stuff you're going to get for pacing. I read a lot of, I guess, what you would probably call literary fiction for character development. So I think part of it, to answer your original question, reading widely to be able to build the skill set and balance it out so that we're able to write good character that will then, if we are listening to the character and being true to the character with our sort of general outline of a plot, then those characters will drive the plot in a way that feels authentic, but also keeps the pace up. I guess that would be my answer.
Yeah.
Liz, what are your thoughts?
This is a big point of my imposter syndrome, is that I don't feel like I read enough to sometimes call myself a writer, even though I'm writing, even though I'm working on multiple projects, and even though I've read so many books, in my lifetime. I feel a little bit behind the eight ball with reading within my genre. And part of that is just my life for the past few years. And part of it is a fear, and I don't know if it's quite a rational fear or not, but I am afraid that I'm going to unintentionally parrot someone else's style or, plot devices. I've never done this intentionally or unintentionally, like plagiarized or copied, but I think that there are so many great tropes in across genres. And sometimes I want to kind of honor those or echo them. But I do find if I'm reading like a lot of thriller, I start to be like, well, what's my idea? And what am I just kind of like amalgamating from all the things I've read? Right. So what I've been trying to do lately is, if I'm working on, Greg and I just finished our fourth book, and I was reading a ton about con artists and the history of con artistry. And I was also reading some nonfiction psychology stuff. And that was really helpful in the writing. And now on my solo project, I'm writing something that's kind of more literary horror. So what I'm trying to do is like, what can I read that's going to inspire me?
Yeah. But
not feel like I'm going to be too influenced, which is kind of a hard alchemy. So, part of it is just attention span. And I'm like, what can I pick up that I won't put down and like look at my fucking phone?
Right.
That has nothing to do with the quality of the work I've picked
Yeah.
up. It has everything to do with like my wrecked attention span. So, this is why I really rely on friends who are writers and readers to say, like, I just read this book. You need to stop everything you're doing and read it because it's going to fill that hole in yourself.
Yeah. I all of that makes sense to me. And I it's the same for horror for me. I'm reading a lot less horror now than I used to.
Okay. What are you reading more of?
What's that?
What are you reading more of? What are you gravitating towards?
I guess what you would call like literary fiction. That's always been my favorite realm. It's what I spent most of my 20s trying to write and failing to write, and then realizing like I love horror, I'll just write that, and then it just comes out really easily.
Sure.
But yeah, with horror, in a very similar way, I kind of don't want to know what people are doing right now, because I kind of know myself. I know that my horror sensibilities are always kind of they'll lie more in the classic realm than they will more in the modern realm.
Same, yeah.
And I think I don't want to unintentionally read something that's more like on the modern side and then write it, and then I would feel like a fraud. Like even if it wasn't necessarily like a carbon copy, I would still feel like, oh, but this isn't me. Like unless I came up with this organically, it wouldn't feel like me. So what I've done, and I don't know if it works, I have no scientific data to back this up, but if I do read a modern horror novel, I'll listen to it on audiobook, because I'm like, all right, if I'm listening to it, I'm not seeing the words strung together. A smarter person would probably look at me and go, that equates to the same thing, dummy. But it seems to, because there are things like you had mentioned, Greg, like when you start to make friends in this industry and writers that that are writing these books, you want to read them. You don't want to end up on a panel and they're talking about this book and just being like, you're my friend and I didn't read this book,
right?
And so yeah, I tend to do that, but then the rest of it is sort of it's just literary fiction, and then I'll get into some other genres. Like I do like thrillers a lot. I like crime novels. I like certain science fiction, not all science fiction. I like science fiction that is heavy on the fiction and less heavy on the science.
Right.
And then I do like classics. And like I'm that asshole that's like, Moby Dick really is one of the more important novels. But yeah, I'm also that asshole that has read Infinite Jest twice. And
wow.
Yeah. I'm like, I saw this video the other day on, it was either Instagram or TikTok or something, but it was this woman, bless her, just haranguing quote unquote lit bros, and I had not heard this term before.
Okay.
But it's like dudes that like David Foster Wallace and like William Gaddis and Don DeLillo, and like Jonathan Franzen and stuff like that. Right. And I'm watching this being like, I like all of those writers. And I'm like, oh, I'm just an eye roll inducing lit bro. Yeah, well, to thine own self be true, I guess.
Yeah, it's the backlash to the backlash.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or there's a reason that those writers you mentioned are hugely popular outside of other writers, some of these writers are just really good. It's crazy that you mention Infinite Jest, because I was reading his Kenyan speech today. This is Water.
Yeah, that's Foster great.
Wallace, and that got me kind of in a rabbit hole. And that is one of those books that I've purchased twice. I carried it around on a vacation, and that's a very stupid book to tote around.
It's a big one.
£14.
Yeah.
And I kind of felt turned off by it because there was a period of time in like the early aughts where like every guy I either knew or dated had read it. And if, they had kind of construed something from it that I didn't like. So I completely judged this hugely important book to many people based on a couple of idiots. So,
but you know what though?
I need to read it before I judge. And I've often judged books that I haven't read, which is a problem, and I'm admitting it.
I have too. And like but there is absolute merit to what you just said, because I have met a lot of men in my life who love Infinite Jest, and I can't stand them. And I just go, oh no. oh no, am I one of those? Can I not stand me?
Yeah.
It's the same thing with Thomas Pynchon too. I was in not like library fundraiser or something like that. Not this is before I was ever published, but I was just there, and I was at a small group of people that had all read Gravity's Rainbow, including myself. And I'm listening to these people, and I felt like Alvy Singer and Annie Hall. Where I'm just like, oh Lord, guys, it's just a fucking look. I liked it, but it's just a book. Like Trout Stein, like you guys are pulling all the worst parts of this and turning it into a personality. It's just really fun to read.
Right.
And but yeah, I mean, I guess that's one of those like, it's a tough thing. But you reminded me of something when Jason Segel did the end of the tour where he played David Foster Wallace. He did this interview, and I'm forgetting where it was, but it's a great interview. But he had never read Infinite Jest, so he went to his local bookstore, and he goes up to this woman behind the counter, and he's like, "Yeah, do you guys have Infinite Jest?" And from what Jason Segel said, she goes, "Ugh." Every guy I've ever slept with has an unread copy of Infinite Jest on his bookshelf. And I was like, yeah, I can see that.
Which just totally validates my suspicion that all of these guys who have said they loved it didn't actually read it, and they're douchebags giving a perfectly good book a bad name by association.
It's a tough read. It's a really tough read. And I will say, and I may be committing like heresy here, I think his editor, Michael Peach, sorry to call him out, who is a great editor and edited most of his stuff and did a really great job, especially with The Pale King, the book that they published post-mortem, I think did the book a disservice. I think that if half of that book had been cut out, it would have been a perfect novel. But even, like I love David Foster Wallace. I love his essays more. I like Infinite Jest. I don't love Infinite Jest. The reason I read it a second time is I'm like, there's got to be something to the other half that I don't like, that I'm missing. And I came away with it going, nope, I still don't like that other half. And a lot of that is just that minutia and a lot of that sort of like psychobabble and just, the crazy initialisms and acronyms and all this, was just blocks and blocks of tight text. And, but when you get through it, you do feel like you've accomplished something. Like, I'll give him that.
Sure.
Like you turn that last page of the 200 pages of endnotes and you go, son of a bitch, I did it.
Right. Yeah.
And I wonder, releasing a book like that, I wonder how he must have felt with imposter syndrome, because I know that a lot of people were reviewing the book before they had a chance to read the entire thing. Like, it takes like at least like a month or two, if not 2 months really, to read Infinite Jest. And when books were coming out, he like that didn't have arcs or didn't have galleys or anything that were coming out, or people were talking about it and being like, it's a work of genius. It's like, you haven't read it yet. Or if you did, you like sped read it. And I like, so that must have been really tough for him. I don't know necessarily, other than from what he's written in essays, I don't know a whole lot about him personally. I've heard, some stories that said he was a really good guy. I've heard stories that said he was an absolute shit. So yeah, but I wonder how imposter syndrome must have struck him, writing a book of that size that becomes sort of like the voice of a generation novel, and just thinking like, God, I hope that never happens to me. Not that it would, but I really hope, because that, I don't know if I could ever write anything again if something like that happened.
Right. That might end up being crippling in a certain time. And it's also, you both made this good point a few minutes ago. It also, there are those books that become status symbols outside of actual literature, outside of whatever they stand for in the canon of literature, or as a book on its, judged on its own merits. It becomes the status symbol, or the thing that, guys tell women that they've read to try and sleep with them, or how you kick your bona fides out at a cocktail party, or whatever intellectual rigor you equate that to. And it takes on another life outside of literature, and it becomes almost a cultural phenomenon. And then what does that do to your imposter? How does that flip things in your head?
I imagine it's got to turn in, it into the perfect storm.
Right. Yeah, I would imagine.
I'm just like, I hope, I just want a small don't tell my publisher this, but I just want like a small, respectable readership that'll just stick with me for every book.
There you go.
I don't need the cover of Time. I don't need any of that kind of stuff, because if that ever happens, I'll never be able to write another. I won't be able to write a fucking email if that happens to me.
Yeah. I mean, it just does seem crippling. And then who are we going to get to play you in the biopic? I mean,
a Muppet of some kind.
Okay. I like it.
Yeah, a Muppet of some kind. So I remember I was in New York, and someone, and I'm sure you guys get this too, but like you get the like, who you look like kind of thing. And the person goes, Chris Sarandon. Never heard that before. And it was like a weird pull. And I'm like, from Princess Bride and Frighteners and Child's Play.
Right.
Or Fright Night, not Frighteners.
Fright Night. Yeah.
And he was like, yeah. And I was like, no. And I don't think I look like him, but you know what, man? Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Because that's a weird pull. I'll take it.
Is. Yeah, that's.
And he would play like your great grandfather at this point in the biopic.
Yeah.
Ooh, we might have to do some write-ins about who would play Scott Leeds.
No. We're not going to do that at all.
I was also going to say, as far as our readerships, I think we are going to be excluding plumbers who feel creative and aspire to write, who are fans of Infinite Jest.
That's why I didn't want to say plumber, because that's such a shorthand for like Joe Regular, when it's like plumbers are smarter than all of us because they make so much money.
Yeah, and good luck getting your toilet fixed this season.
I know.
Yeah, no, they've done it. They've done it right.
The funny thing too is like I have a friend who's a plumber. Yeah. Like I do, like a legit friend who works for Raptor Rooter, and like he's gonna be so pissed. Like, dude, why? And I'm like, I do. It's not like It's not. It's small P plumber, not capital P.
I don't think we said anything disparaging about plumbers. I think
I love plumbers. They save me.
There's a plumber out there who's also a novelist.
Yeah, who loves Infinite Jest.
Yeah,
I'd like to meet that guy.
Do we have a couple more minutes with you, Scott?
Sure.
So the third tent pole or fork prong of Imposter Hour is: have you experienced a con in real life, whether you were conned or scammed, or someone close to you that you would be willing to share about?
That's a really good question. Yes, several times. I'm a very gullible, you can't believe how many Nigerian princes I have given money to. Yeah, I mean there have been I've been conned in sort of like early business. So I when I first moved to Los Angeles, which was in 2004 or 5, an interesting thing happens when you move to a city like that, especially an industry city. New York is a wonderful city. You can certainly get conned in New York. I'm not saying you can't, but New York is the city of every industry, whereas it's one industry. And so within that industry, there are people that get the work done. There are people that are close to getting the work done, and there are people who are aspiring to get the work done. And the people who are aspiring to get the work done are the most visible and the friends you're going to make first. And, you meet everybody from like, oh yeah, my dad's dentist is also John Hamm's dentist, and I think we could get him for our short film. And when you're 20, you go, really? Wow, man, you call back home. But guess what, guys? It wouldn't have been John Hamm, but whoever back then, Nicolas Cage. We're going to get Nicolas Cage for our short film. It's going to happen. We're going to get funding. And of course, it doesn't happen. And then it's rinse and repeat for a couple of years. Each time getting a little bit more further into the actual belly of the beast. But there was one. So many. I've been emotionally conned. There have been. God, that's a good question. That's a very good question. But yeah, LA is a city that I really like. And I don't want to shit on Los Angeles because I lived there for 10 years. And while I didn't love the weather or the traffic, although the traffic gives you a lot of good podcasting time, even though I didn't love those two things, there are things about LA that I absolutely love. But the one thing that I didn't love was how quickly normal people who otherwise never would have conned someone con people just to try to get that foot in either in the door or a step ahead of you. And there are really, really good, very beautiful people in Los Angeles, people that are trustworthy and open. And I would even venture to say the majority of people in the industry are like that. There are a few really bad apples, especially really high up, and there are some bad apples really down low. And they will do whatever they can and cozy up to you in whichever way they can, and then immediately step on your back to lift themselves up into that place. And sometimes it works, and sometimes they can keep moving up and up and up and up, and then sometimes they fall flat on their face. And I take no joy in either of those things. But yeah, I mean, I don't want to like get really specific and name names, but yeah, like there were a lot of times where I was bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and I thought like, oh man, like this person, they know this producer and they're going to get funding on this thing. And where I would go and they said, well, like, I'm not a writer, but I can get the money together. And I would go and write a full script, 120-page script, and it would never go anywhere. And then they would take that script and shop it around without me. And yeah, that fucking sucked, man.
I don't know if you have any of those scripts still kicking around, but no, stick with me on this. Stick with me on this. Nick Cage has been doing some very experimental work in recent years. You might be able to pitch him.
I know. Now, if Nick Cage now had been Nick Cage back then.
Also, he is listening to this episode.
Yeah, of course. Nick Cage is everywhere.
Correct.
Yeah.
He is omniscient and omnipresent.
We're going to hashtag the shit out of Nick Cage.
By the way,
yeah,
I'm sure you guys have seen, but like, can you not wait for Long Legs?
Oh.
The ad campaign.
Yeah.
I love a good ad campaign. And like when they like the fact that I think they've only showed like a flash of him, of his character, and he's got like his hands over his eyes and stuff like that. But just the ad campaign has been exactly all I ever want from any movie ever.
It's so frightening, and I don't even know why.
Yeah. It's just cryptic and weird.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful, and it's Anthony Perkins' son directing it.
Nice.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Who was also in Legally Blonde.
Yeah.
Who was he in Legally Blonde?
I'm trying to remember. I've seen that movie once and I really liked it. So now I kind of want to watch it again. But
okay,
he was, I think he was the sort of, he wasn't Luke Wilson, obviously, because that was Luke Wilson. But he was the sort of, I think, kind of awkward, gawky guy that like the girls were making fun of.
He looks like his father. No, I know exactly who you're talking about.
That's the guy that directed Long Legs. Yeah.
Wow.
And he's done other movies too, and they're not coming to my brain at the moment. But movies that I've liked, but this one I cannot wait for. I'm very excited.
Nice.
I mean, and this is a couple years back, but Mandy is my favorite Nick Cage movie. In
great one.
A while.
Yeah, and like what was like Color Out of Space?
That was great.
Amazing. Pig, amazing.
Pig was awesome.
Yeah. I'm so glad that we don't have Memphis Reigns anymore. Now we're getting like really good. I did like Gone in 60 Seconds. I thought that was good. But
I mean, Raising Arizona needs to be a must watch.
It's a perfect movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a perfect movie.
I'd throw his performance in Moonstruck in there as well.
Ooh.
Love it. It Could Happen to You. Fantastic.
Yeah.
There's not many Nick Cage things that I don't like. I mean, like there was this period a little while before he got to like his like renaissance over the last 10 years where he was doing like Indianapolis and just like crappy movies.
Yeah.
But yeah, he also made a movie. Sad because I know like it's with James Franco, unfortunately, but he directed a movie called Sunny, which is great.
Oh yeah, I remember Sunny. That was at IFC. I think I saw that.
Yeah, it was really, really good. I got that. I remember when just during the DVD boom of like the early 2000s when everything was getting like 2-disc special editions, even like Monster Squad and Our Lives Were Brilliant.
Sure.
That one, I think I bought that and then Bartleby on the same day. Did you guys ever see Bartleby?
Never saw it. I remember when it came out.
Yeah, it's Crispin Glover playing Bartleby the Scrivener.
Yes.
That's my second Melville reference today. My goodness. I am a snob. Oh, I need to go buy a Fraser 3-button suit.
But you balanced it out with Monster Squad. So
I love Monster Squad.
Yeah, right?
Which reminds me of another thing. Did you guys ever watch In Search of Darkness, the 3-part documentary?
No.
Okay. I think parts 2 and 3 are on Shudder right now. I don't know where part 1 went. Maybe there was a licensing thing. Hopefully they'll get it back.
Okay.
3 4.5-hour documentaries on almost every horror movie from the 80s.
Yeah, I did watch it. Yeah,
it's
I
fantastic.
I gotta get on this.
It's it took me a long, like Infinite Jest, it took me a long time to get through it because I didn't watch it in huge blocks.
Right.
But I would watch like 20-30 minutes a day, and it was just I when it was all over, I was really bummed.
Okay, nice.
It's so good. Yeah,
it's so good, and just things that I'd never even heard of, where I'm just like, I could put it on the list. I'm in.
I mean, this is why I don't get pages to Greg in time, because I'm watching 4 hours worth.
That's so. I know I've asked you guys this question before, but can you guys talk a little bit about? And I know we're running out of time, but can you guys talk a little bit about? Because it is astounding to me, the process of writing with another person. I am such a control freak, and I am such the god of my own world. That if anybody just goes, you know what you could do, I just go, shut up and write your own goddamn novel. How were you guys? I know you guys have been friends forever, and I know that plays a part in it. But like, can you guys just talk a little bit about the process of it? Because it's just amazing to me. To me, you guys are superheroes.
Well, thank you. We were talking earlier about like the world building we do as writers.
Yeah.
And I think, for myself, and I think Greg has this too, we've talked about it a lot, like writing and creating stories is a way of synthesizing, where we've been and what we've experienced and what we've seen, and how we kind of sort it out in the stories and on the page and in characters. And I think as writers, you kind of design your own world in your head. And, I think very rarely you meet other people in your life that kind of live in that same or adjacent world,
right?
Where you can speak in shorthand, and whether it's about a character, a feeling, a plot device, I think that we realized in our 20s and 30s that we kind of lived in a similar world.
Sure.
We lived in the world, and then there was the world in our heads. So I think that jumping off point allowed us to say, like, can we do this? Can we have a partnership where we kind of both live in this world and are co-gods? I guess we are a polytheistic,
you guys are
society.
Greece.
Yeah.
And just this having been in acting school together and knowing improv, and
I didn't know you guys went to acting school together.
We did.
We did. And we were in a theater company together, so we acted in shows. And
so you guys are just yes-anding each other.
We are yes-anding each other.
Yeah, that's a lot of it.
Wow.
And I also think when you know someone for a really long time, especially, in friendship, and you go through various, versions of yourself, and there's a lot of like humility and humiliation,
sure,
as it might be.
Yeah.
You generally, or you naturally, or I should speak for myself, I've lost a lot of ego when it comes to, my friendship with Greg. So I'm not afraid to kind of like write a bad sentence or fall on my face with a plot device, because I know he's not going to be like, you're an idiot, or like, what are you fucking thinking? Or like, I don't want to deal with this shit. He's, always supportive.
That's so rare.
Yeah.
Wow. That's really cool.
Yeah. And people ask us all the time, like, what do we fight about? And we don't, because we're non-confrontational people.
Right.
What he says when I'm not in the room is another thing entirely. But, I think that you have to find compatible personality types if you're going to do any partnership in life, whatever the dynamic.
I'm sorry to cut you off, but just you guys, biggest fear in the world, right, is getting off a call with somebody being like, what a fucking idiot, and be like, still on. And you're like, oh, that's the nightmare.
That's the one, of course.
That's the nightmare.
Yeah.
I have to say, I've noticed it's a good thing that I'm scared now that like my text is recording and going to send to people, because iPhones have been doing that. Did you know that? Like if you say someone's name,
oh yeah,
your phone might very well dial them or text them.
Yeah.
So if I ever have this experience, like I need to check my phone to see if it just dialed or texted that person, I'm like, stop it. Like, what are you saying? Like, don't be an asshole.
Good self-regulator.
I remember my dog once like hopped on the bed and like was pawing around doing what dogs do, and then he pawed at my phone, and I heard I saw a message sent, and I was like, what? What did he type, and who did he type it to? But I have to say real quick, even though this is very embarrassing for me, it's a really funny story, I hope. But it did happen to me once. A very good friend of mine was married to this guy. And I was friends with the guy too, because, you know, they were married and you're friends with both of them. But my friendship was with the woman. And they had some troubles, and then they went through a divorce. And she kind of left town for a while, and then she came back, and I went and I said hello, and I kind of visited with her for a long time. We had like a really long, great talk, and I came home, and I kind of typed out this big text. I just said, look, I'm so proud of you. I think you've made the best decision in the world, and I cannot wait to see what happens to you in the future. And just, you know, any trepidation that you're feeling, don't feel it, because you made the right decision. And I sent it to her ex-husband.
Oh. Was that the moment that he became her ex-husband?
It could have been.
You...
But like, because I didn't notice it at first. I just like, whoop, and I sent it, and I was going about my day. And then I just heard like bink, and I was like, oh, what did she have to say? And it was just a question mark. And I was like, well, I don't think what I said was that confusing. And then I looked up at the name, and I was like, oh my God. So that was so now I always check. And it's like J. Walter Weatherman from Arrested Development.
So much worse. It sounds like everything you said was really
true. I didn't say anything bad about him, and I wouldn't have, because I really do to this day still like him very much. He was a really good guy. It just didn't work out. And eventually we got together, and he was like, man, what the hell? And I was just like, look, first of all, I meant what I said, but I would have said the same thing to you. And it's also like, it's what friends say to one another when they're going through things like this. Right. You know, if someone loses someone, you know, you go, I'm here for you. Anything that you need. Obviously, if you need me to move all of your books from one room to the other in 2 hours, I'm not going to do that thing. What I mean is, emotionally, I'm here for anything that you need, you know?
Only emotional heavy lifting.
Exactly. Right. If you need me to just go peel bananas, chew them up, and then spit them into a jar so you can feed them to your llamas, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
Wow. Has someone asked you to do that?
No, but I'm very passionate about it in case it ever happens, so I'm on the record.
Also, I mean, this is the kind of, to go back to the earlier part of the conversation, this is the kind of specificity of character we're talking about.
Yes.
Yeah. Well,
no, I've never heard that or read that anywhere else in my entire life.
My one of my best and closest friends in the world, a guy named Seth, who I do a podcast with him, Rusty Needles Record Club. Go check it out.
Nice.
We're listening to every album that has ever made. It's going to take us forever. But he had a really great thing, because he used to write with me back in the day, and it was the specificity of comedy, where he's like, what's funnier? I spilled coffee on my pants, or, oh no, I spilled coffee on my chinos.
Right. Chinos, hands down.
Yeah, you know,
Devil's
way funnier.
Details, for sure.
Way funnier.
Well, so you've written in a partnership. How was that?
That was in advertising.
Okay.
Yeah, there's no narrative there. I mean, you can try, but the client will always shoot you down. Yeah, like that's, you know, like with like the ad campaign I did for my book, we were working on I tried to pitch that to like a million studios, this like 1970s style magazine ad thing, and all of them were like, no, get the fuck out of here, stupid. And I got out. And then we had Anchorman 2, and I was like, this is the one. This is the one. It takes place in the 70s. Like, these guys are built, like, look, they have like Gillette's The Dry look in their hair already. Like, this is they're tailor-made for this kind of ad campaign. And I got right up to the edge. And Paramount finally kind of pulled out and was like, no, which I can't blame them. It's fine. But yeah, I tried to have like a whole narrative, and like, you know, because on those great old 70s ads, you can write so much. There's so much copy, so you could do so much stuff. And like, even we did this Judd Apatow movie called The 5-Year Engagement, where we made a marriage blog. I don't know, it might still be up, I don't know, but for Jason Segel and what's her name? She was the new Mary Poppins. She was in
Emily Blunt.
Emily
Blunt.
She's great.
It's might be the funniest thing I've ever written. And my friend wrote a bunch on it too. But like, these blog posts, and nobody saw it. And the studio paid for it, and they were like, why did we pay for this? Because it was funny and it was fun.
I mean, we're gonna have to link those now to the show notes.
I wonder if it's still up. I doubt it is.
Okay,
I doubt
we'll
it is.
do a little investigation.
We sure will.
Sure.
And Scott, I'm glad you brought that back around. I was going to try and work it in toward the end of the episode as well. Anyone who's listening, if you want to see an ad campaign executed perfectly,
Yes,
go to Scott's social media, go to IG and check out the ad campaign he did for Schrader's Chord. It is phenomenal.
Well,
Yes.
thank you. I was not fishing for that. I promise you.
No. Oh yeah, no. This is not a pre-plan or anything like that. But it came up, I don't know, 15 minutes ago, and I wanted to try and bring it back around because it's. I think also for with authors, I mean, there's a lot of that left brain, right brain stuff where we're not necessarily the best or most savvy or most succinct or tactical promoters of our own work, because again, it's sort of it's the opposite side of the brain, but but you nail it. So anyone out there, any authors or any aesthetes or anyone who is just interested in humor and crisp visuals and everything else that goes into a good ad campaign, go check it out. It's great.
Well, thank you for that. I've had a few authors like DM me and just kind of talk about the ad campaign, and even though it wasn't asked, I'll say this real quick. The publisher has a lot of mouths to feed. Mm-hmm. I don't blame the publisher or any publisher for not doing everything it can to sell a book. They have a lot of mouths to feed, a lot of authors to worry about and to juggle.
Right. And,
as long as you're not crossing a line, like I tell writers, like, do your own ad campaign. Or if you don't have, that sensibility, the only reason I do is because I've worked in advertising reluctantly for 15 years. Right. I never wanted this job. I never interviewed. I just fell into it because I knew the guy who owned the company, and he was like, hey, do you want to make a cartoon? And we did. And then the funding fell out on that. And he's like, okay, we need you to start working on movies. And so I did. And I've been there for 15 years. Yeah. And, but like, reach out to someone that who might work in advertising, who are worked in digital marketing or something like that. There's a billion of them. Since social media exploded, a million. It was like the Velvet Underground and Nico launched 1,000 bands. Social media launched 1,000 digital marketing companies because every studio needs them. A lot of them are going in-house now, but they still exist. They're out there. And these kind of campaigns, they get the chance to do the campaign that the clients won't let them do. And so reach out to these artists, reach out to graphic artists, do the thing, take control. And, if your publisher ever says, hey, calm it down a little bit, do it. Don't, you don't want to piss them off. But at the same time, I'm betting you that they probably won't mind. Right. Because they're just going to be happy that you're doing anything, and that, again, good ads sell books.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
And have fun. And also, it's your chance to take control of who you are, of your own narrative. Mm-hmm. Like, show the people who you are through your marketing. I only say all this because I don't post anything else on social media. I have people ask me, like, why don't you post like pictures or like, a photo of spaghetti? And I'd be like, because no one gives a shit.
Right. I mean, I always give a shit about a photo of spaghetti, but yeah.
Well,
speaking
I
of
misspoke. Fuck, man, spaghettis, plumbers. Man, I'm really digging myself deep this episode. And I like all of those things.
Where can people find you? Speaking of your
you can find me advertising for myself on Instagram. And I guess I have a Twitter account. I never use it. I don't have a TikTok. I don't have Facebook. Maybe I do have Facebook. I haven't been on it in 10 years, so maybe it's still there. It's just rotting. But yeah, Instagram.
Okay.
Yeah. Threads I kind of got grandfathered into, but I don't use that either. But so Instagram.
Yeah. Okay, Instagram, and the name of your book is Schrader's Chord.
Yeah, and my phone number is
It's available wherever books are available, and it has been such a treat, Scott. We adore you.
Thank you guys for having me. This means a lot, and I'm sorry for everything that I've said. I'm sorry for talking too much.
No.
I hope you guys still are friends with me when we're done with this, and I didn't commandeer your podcast, and I'm sorry.
Podcasting is a verbal medium, Scott.
I know, but maybe that should be your new sign off. Your new sign off is "I'm sorry."
I'm sorry. Thank you for tolerating us again for another episode of Imposter Hour with Liz and Greg. Go do something useful with your life.